because today, being Model Monday, is all about the base. No, it's all about the money shooting tool. I'm being careful not to call this a gun because the world has too much of those. This is a tool. What for spitting money out at things. And so this is where we got to so far. I believe this is part 4. So far we are right here. We've got our. We just finished last week starting the body of our tool here, and this week we're going to design the overmolding over the top of it. So my inspiration for this tool, in case you hadn't gotten that already, is here, my tool.
Everyone talk about your tool.
My tool, my inspiration is this guy right here. So, obviously this is the only kind of tool that you should have in this city. It is the right color and says the right words on it, and it is great. Mine will not. So this is kind of the inspiration for the tool here. So it's got this overmolded rubber, which I think is super cool. And the whole purpose of this project has been to do this overmolding or design a part that has overmolding that I can make. So that being said, let's go ahead and jump right into this. So we've got our project open here, and I'm going to go ahead and make my body my active component. So the name of the component that I'm making this kind of like shell in, I called body. You may have called it something else, but I called mine body, and so I'm going to make that my active component, and then I'm going to spin it down. And if you remember last week, the first thing we did, or the last thing we did, was to make, to use in the surface area. So we're going to kind of be living in this surface area for quite a bit here of this class. From the surface area, we used this thicken command. And the thicken command allowed us to turn our surface, which is like this zero-dimensional, it's not really zero-dimensional, zero thickness surface, into a 3-dimensional object. So this is the surface command we used right here. If I just go back and say edit feature, I made this 1/8 of an inch. And that's going to be the outer or the upper thickness of my of the plastic part of my body. And we're going to do this a bunch more times to make all of the other kind of preceding levels of this. So there's going to be a level of this that is a little bit thinner than what this is, because underneath this overmolding, you can imagine it being a thinner plastic shell there, and then we'll have a thicker layer than what we have here that is basically the overmolding. So it's where the overmolding is sticking out. And then up above that even we'll have another thicker bit. And that's because the overmolding has like detailing in it. I really like that. So that'll be the overmold detailing. So we're going to use the thickening command to make all those different stages. And then we'll come back and we'll start subtracting away from those in order to actually design the overmold. So it'll probably be easier to do this once we actually just start doing it. So I've got my first body made, and that body, which we did not name last time, we're going to name these all. This is going to be the thickest part of my plastic. So it's going to be my, main plastic. or maybe I'll call it thick plastic. Maybe that's what I'll do. Thick plastic. So this is going to be the upper level of our plastic shell. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. And then I'm going to turn my main body on, my main body shell. This is my surface. And I'm going to use that thicken command again. So I'm going to come up to the create menu, and I'll scroll down to this thicken option here. And now when I do this, I want to be careful that I select all of the surfaces that make up this body. So in order to make sure I'm selecting all the surfaces, because it's really easy just to click on, one surface and you don't have everything, we need to click on all the faces that make up this body. So in order to do that, I'm going to select the body in my bodies folder that I want to thicken. Instead of clicking out into my drawing area, I'm going to click on it in my bodies folder over here in my browser. And that way I've selected all the faces that are associated with that body. And now the thickest part of our plastic body was 1/8 of an inch. So I'm going to make the thinnest part of my plastic shell half of that. So like 0.0625, I believe, would be half of that. Or is it 675? 625 will be fine. So just a thinner amount than the 1/8 of an inch or whatever the thick plastic you made was. And again, my thick plastic was 0.125, so this is going to be 0.0625. Or, as a reminder, you can do math right here. So I could do 0.125 inches divided by 2. And that would give me, that'll make it half the thickness there. All right, so then I'm going to say OK. So now I've got a thin plastic shell. And, really these exist right on top of each other. And that's totally fine. So this is going to be the thin plastic. All right, and now I'm going to turn off that body as well. So I'm going to turn off that body that I just made, the thin plastic. And I'm going to turn back on my main body surface again. And now I'm going to do that 2 more times. So I'm going to use my thicken command again. I'm going to create and then thicken. And the faces that I'm going to select are all the faces that make up my main body here. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the main body in my bodies folder in my browser. And now this is going to be a little bit thicker than my 0.125 inches. So it's going to be 0.125 inches, and maybe let's add 0.05. Just make it a little bit thicker than the plastic, my thick plastic. All right, and then I'm going to say OK there. And now this body, this is going to represent my overmold. So I'm going to call this body my overmold, because this is where my overmold parts, all my rubber bits are going to be created here. So I'm going to call that overmold, and then I can turn off that body, and I'll turn on my main body surface one more time, and then one last time here, I'm going to come down here and grab my thicken command. I'm going to choose as the faces that I'm going to thicken, I'm going to choose the surface body in my bodies folder in my browser. And the thickness of this is going to be my 0.125 inches, and then it's going to be plus, I did 0.05, let's do 0.1 this time. So my main overmold, or my overmold was 0.05 inches thicker than my plastic, And now this is going to be the details part of my overmold. So I'm going to make that just a little bit thicker than that at 0.125 plus 0.1. Or I guess you could also call this 0.225. That would also be fine. All right, and now I'm going to name that last body that I have created, that last shell. This is going to be my over mold details. All right.
Hey, Carl.
Yeah.
I'm getting an error when I tried to create when I tried to make that third thicken command.
What does the error say?
It said, well, I'll try to do it again. So create, thicken, and we were setting it 0.125.
And it was a plus 0.05. Yeah,
Okay,
so that
yeah.
third... You got an error again?
Yeah. I will share my screen.
Yeah, do so. This is the
Oh.
plus of coming to class live and not watching the stream, is you can... All right, cool. So, what does that error say when you click on it?
Cannot offset selected faces. Adjust the offset value, thickness value, or selection set.
So, instead of 0.05, can you make it like 0.02?
I tried adjusting it, and it's real. Okay, yeah, it doesn't want to do that one.
So, I wonder if there's another way to do this. So, sometimes Fusion just goes, hey, I'm not doing that for whatever reason. And I'm kind of wondering, can I use the thicken command on a body? No. I have to use it on a surface. Can I make a new surface from an existing body? The kind of the surface area is newish to me here, so can you make it any amount of thickness over?
I can make it. It seems that I can. Well, let me see. Create. 0. Okay, plus 0.0. Let's say 0. Yeah, it doesn't. What if it's 0.1? Yeah, it doesn't. It doesn't want to do that. Really does not like that.
So I'm trying a different technique here. So give me a minute to work through this. So I'm trying this. There is an offset surface command here. So what I'm attempting to do is if I say create and then offset, and I go through and I pick and I make an offset from every surface. Offset that guy, and then lastly offset this guy. So I made this, so I've got all these bodies now. they're all surface bodies, and I made them all by offsetting my one of my regular bodies. So whatever the thickest body that you could make was, if it's that second one where we made the thick plastic. So I made new surfaces based on one of those bodies. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, cool. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch them all together. So in the modify menu, I'm going to go ahead and grab this stitch command here. And I think I can just select all these. I can. So I can click on the first body and then I can shift click. I'm going to do that again. I can click on the first body in my bodies folder, the first surface body, and then I can hold the shift key down and click on the last one. And the stitch command, we used this I think briefly in the previous video, I think, and that'll stitch all those bodies into one body. And then I'm curious if from there, if using that as your starting point, can you thicken from there?
All right, let me see. So first you did an offset.
Yeah, so I went to, whatever the thickest body you could make was, I turned that one on. And then I went up to the create menu and I chose, and now I'm in the surface area here, so I'm in the surface workspace, and I chose this offset option. And now you'll have to do that step for each one. Actually, can I? Oh, look, you can do more than one at the same time. So if I click on all the faces, I've got all 6 selected here.
But you're not setting an actual offset distance.
Yep. Yeah, I'm not setting an offset distance. I'm really just creating a new surface, a surface body on top of the 3-dimensional body, the solid body, I suppose you should call it. Oh, and when you do it like that, you don't have to stitch them. That's kind of nice. So I didn't have to stitch it together. So here I'm going to go ahead and delete that. So when I chose to do this offset thing, and I picked all the faces at the same time. Oh boy, I got a lot of stuff highlighted there for no reason. Were you able to make that surface?
Yes, that surface. I was able to make the surface, and I was able to make a new body out of it.
And you were able to thicken it?
Yep.
Sweet. All right. Cool. So do that. See if you can use that surface to make one more body, and that body is going to be just even a little bit thicker than the overmold. So my overmold thickness was. I'm going to delete all this stuff. So actually, yeah, I'm going to delete all this stuff so I don't get confused. Okay. So that overmold details body is the 4th thicken, and I made mine, here are the measurements that I made mine, is my thickness of 1/8 of an inch plus 0.01. Now, you're not going to be doing this anymore, I guess, right? This 1/8 of an inch, because you've already got your 1/8 of an inch built in to your thicken command, so you might just be at like 0.01 depending. You know, the beautiful thing about this technique, though, too, is we can go back and we can change the thickness of our overmold just by changing these offsets here. So it's not really crucial right now that it be precise, because you can tweak it after the fact. All right, so now that we've got our bodies made, now let's actually make our overmold design. So I'm going to make an offset plane, and on that offset plane, I'm going to draw my my overmold pattern or design, I guess. So let's go up to my construct menu, and I'm going to go ahead and choose an offset plane. Now I want this plane to live up above where my tool is here, so I'm going to offset it from this top plane right here, and I'm just going to drag this plane up. This doesn't need to be any specific distance here. You just want it to be clearly up above where your model is, so you don't want it here where it might clip into where your model is. You want it clearly up above where that is. So for me, 4.5 inches is fine. And I'm going to go ahead and say OK here. And now I've got a plane to name. So we've got a construction folder that has appeared. And we're trying to be diligent about naming everything. So this is going to be the, I don't know, the overmold drawing. I'm just going to call it overmold. That's the plane I'm going to draw my overmold design on. I guess more precisely, this is going to be the top overmold, because we're going to have a overmold for the side and possibly for the bottom as well. But we'll just start out here with the top. Now, if I, from my Create menu, if I come ahead and grab my Sketch tool here, so I'll click on Create and then Create Sketch. And now I can create my sketch on that surface that I just made, that construction plane that I just made. I am going to turn off all of my other sketches just so they don't clutter up and get in the way here. So I had my front, back, and my path turned on from when we made this lofted surface here. So I went ahead and turned those off. And now we can kind of draw our overmold pattern. So what I'd like to do is to have an area that is clearly cut out. And, you know, most of this tool that I'm using as an inspiration, most of it is the overmold. The visible part, most of it is the rubber. So I'm going to come ahead and from my Create menu, I'm going to go ahead and actually, before I do that, I'd like to know where the middle of this is, because I'd like to have it be symmetrical. So in order to find where the middle of this is, if I project this line and this curve, I can draw a center line that I know will be right up the middle of this. So I'm going to do that first. So from the Create menu, I'm going to come down here to this Project option, and I'm going to choose Project. Now I should mention the body that I am looking at is my overmold details. So this is the thickest overmolding. This is the thickest body that I have. So, you know, one of these is clearly thicker than the other, and you definitely want to be looking at the thickest body that you have. And now I'm going to project just this line at the very front here. And then I'm going to come over here and project this curve at the back. So I've got those two items, those two specified entities that I'm projecting. And then I'm going to say OK. And now I should be able to grab my line tool from my Create menu. And if I hover over the front of that, over what seems to be the middle of that, one of those lines that I projected, gives me that little midpoint snapping thing, that little blue triangle. tells me that I'm snapping to the midpoint. And it should, oh, it's not doing that in the back, but I'm going to assume that this drawing is oriented XY, right? So as long as I'm getting that little 90-degree constraint that pops up here, that little blue square that appears at the intersection, then I know I've got a line that goes right down the middle here. Now, I'm going to change that line into a construction line because I just wanted it as reference. And now on that construction line, I'm going to draw myself some drawings, right? So I'm going to choose to make an ellipse. You could choose to make whatever you want here. I'm going to make an ellipse, and I'm going to place it somewhere near the back. Now, because the back of my tool here has a little hump. It's got a hunchback. So I want to highlight that hunchback as a feature here by having it kind of like poke out of the overmolding. So if I grab my ellipse tool and I place the center point of my ellipse somewhere near the back on that center line that I just made, and then I draw it out like that-ish. I think that's pretty good. And now the other thing that I want to do here is I'd like to have maybe a couple of, actually maybe I don't want to do that. Maybe I want to do that on the details layer. I think that's all I want here is just a real simple cutout. So, you know, you could do something different here if you want to. You could grab your, do a circumscribed polygon. If you wanted to get crazy, you could, or, you know, get interesting. Here, an option would be you could grab the, actually maybe the text tool is a better thing for the details layer as well. Maybe we'll do that. But so I just have a very simple oval. You can make a circle, you can make a square, you can do whatever kind of cutout shape you want to here on the top. And now I'm going to say finish sketch. All right, so I've got a sketch to name. This sketch is my top over mold. All right. So now let's use that sketch to make our overmold. Can we do that at this point? I think we can. So I've got my, this is the part where I have to think a little bit. All right, so because I get confused at this sometimes because we're going to use all these parts to cut away from each other. So the thinnest layer of plastic is not going to be cut away by this overmold, but the thickest layer of plastic, I think we just want to focus on our overmold right now. So I'm going to turn on my overmold body, and I'm going to go ahead and come back to the solid workspace here. So this is my main overmold body that I have on, and if I come up to the Create menu and I choose the Extrude option, and I choose that circle, or whatever detail you drew on the top there, and we extrude that down through just the top of our body here. So I'm just going through this top layer, and I do indeed want to cut. So I'm going to spin down my objects to cut here, and I'm just going to verify that I'm only cutting my overmold body. Now, if I were to extend this down further, you can see that I'm kind of extending into part of another component, and it will let you cut away while you have one component active. It'll let you cut away part of another component. So I often find it handy to spin down this little objects to cut dialog here and just verify, like, oh, I don't want to cut that body there. I really only want to cut my overmold here. And I'm going to spin around because I don't want to, see, I'm kind of taking a little divot here in the back. I only want to cut through the top layer of my overmold. I don't want to cut through any other parts of it. And now I'm going to say OK. All right, so I'm going to turn off my overmold top. And now I think if I turn on my thick plastic, there we go. So you can see if I turn on my thick plastic, I have my overmold sticking out the top here. So this is where I think it would be helpful for us to go ahead and add some appearance to all these bodies here. So all these bodies are gray, and I think that can make things kind of confusing. So I'm going to turn on all my bodies, and I'm going to come up here to the Modify menu, and I'm going to go ahead and come down to Appearance. And again, we're all about like trying to keep this organized visually and otherwise. So my plastic bodies over here, I've already got an ABS. This should say ABS red. I don't know why it does not, because I didn't rename it, and this is showing up on a totally different window. So you guys can't even see this right now. But now it just says ABS. All right. So I'm going to click and drag this over the plastic parts, and I'm just going to change my plastic parts to be that red color. And now I've got this bumpy rubber that we used on another component, and if I drag that bumpy rubber over my two overmold detail bits there, is that actually, nope, steel satin. That's not what I want to do. There we go, bumpy rubber, bumpy rubber. Now I've got all my bodies appropriately colored, and it's a little bit easier for me to see what I got going on there. So a little bit of visual organization help to keep your sanity here. All right, so now here's the process. So we've got part of this overmold cut away. We've got a thin plastic layer here. So anywhere where this thin plastic layer is, let me kind of illustrate what we're trying to do here. If I grab from my Inspect menu, if I grab this Section Analysis tool here, this just lets us kind of look at a, oh boy. So all of these bodies exist right on top of each other. They all start at the same inner surface and just get a little bit thicker, right? So now we're going to use these bodies to cut away from the other bodies. So I'm going to turn off my section analysis, which is way up here. I'm going to turn off my overmold details layer. So to cut away these bodies, we're going to counterintuitively use the Combine command. So from the Modify menu, I'm going to come and grab this Combine option. Now the target body is the body that you want to do the subtracting from. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and change the operation right now from join to cut. So the target body that we want to cut away from is our overmold. And we want to cut away from our overmold the thinnest layer of plastic. So our thin plastic layer is what we want to cut away from that overmold. However, we want to keep that tool. So I'm going to, because we're going to need that thin plastic later, I think. Yeah. All right, so we're going to keep that tool, and I'm going to say, okay. So now our overmold, this body, does not overlap with our thin plastic at all. So now we're going to do that again. So from the Modify menu, if I come down and grab the Combine option again, now, this time, we're going to take our thick plastic, is going to be our target body, and what we're going to cut away from that thick plastic is our overmold. Because remember, there's some amount of overlap between our overmold and our thick plastic, because we just subtracted the thin plastic from it. So, and I don't, we do want to keep these tools too, because our cutting tool body is our overmold. So we're going to go ahead and make sure that Keep Tools checkbox is checked. And I'm going to say OK again. And now, if I turn off my overmold feature, I can see that I've got a little bump out there, so there's no overlap between my overmold and my thick plastic. And do I even need my thin plastic anymore? Yeah, I don't even think I need my thin plastic anymore. So now if I turn on my section analysis, there we go. So now you can see in our section analysis tool here, we don't have all this overlap anymore. We've got a plastic shell here, and we've got this overmolded shell, right? Now let's go ahead and create some details here. So I'm going to turn on my overmold details layer, and I'm going to turn off my other bodies. First, let me do a little check-in. Did that make sense? Did that work out for you guys? Cool? Okay, right on. You have no idea how many times I screwed that up when I was making this drawing for the first couple of times. So
I don't know if I could necessarily replicate it.
Okay, right on.
Rewatching the video, but I kept up.
Yeah, the challenging part was figuring out, all right, what is the geometry that exists, right? And how do I use that existing geometry of all right, so I made this overmolded shape here, right? How do I make this overmolded shape, use that overmolded shape to cut away the parts that I don't need? All right, so we're going to make the detail part of our overmold now. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off my analysis here. So I've got my details overmold body turned on. I've got this top overmold sketch here. And I'm going to go ahead and just use that sketch again to draw my details on. So I'm going to right-click on that top overmold sketch in my browser here, and I'm going to go ahead and say Edit Sketch. And now I can go ahead and make some detail bits. So I kind of want to highlight that, you know what, I want to do arrows. That's what I want to do. I want to do some lines. I want to point where the cache is going to shoot out from. So I'm going to grab my line tool, and I'm just going to draw a couple of lines that go almost, and by a couple, I mean I'm just going to draw one line that goes almost out to the edge here. And now I want to make a pattern of this line all the way down the front of this here. So from my create menu, I'm just going to come down here to this rectangular pattern option. It's kind of, maybe it's counterintuitive to use the rectangular option when you're just making a pattern in one direction, but you only really need to specify one direction for a rectangular pattern. So if I specify a direction of this line here, oh, Adrian, look at that. I'm going to make that 0. There we go. And now I can drag out this way some amount, and I'm going to make it go almost all the way to my oval there. And now I'm just going to crank up this number until I have an odd number, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. I have to have an even number of them. So whatever your number is, it's got to be an even number because we're going to connect the dots on a few of these here. And I'm going to go ahead and say OK. So 10 is a good amount for me. And now I'm going to grab my line tool one more time. And I'm just going to connect every other one. So I'm going to connect every other line. So not all of them, but I'm just kind of connecting every other one. And now from this pattern that I made, I'm going to mirror it over to the other side. So I'm going to come up to my Create menu, and I'm going to come over to Mirror, and I'm going to choose each one of these lines. In fact, instead of selecting all those lines, I think I can box select. Yeah, I can just box select. Pro tip, using the box select tool, if I right click, if I drag from top right to bottom left, only the things that are fully enclosed inside of the selection box will be selected. But if I use my box selection tool the opposite way, if I drag from top left to bottom right, anything that it touches will be selected there. So it's a little bit different way to use that box select option there. And then the line that I'm going to mirror it across is that construction line I made initially. And I'm going to say OK. All right. So now I'm going to that looks good to me. That's all I wanted to make. I'm just going to say finish sketch here. And now we can turn back on that top overmold sketch because it's been turned off. We've still got our overmold details body turned on here. And now we're going to kind of do almost a very similar thing here. So from the Create menu, I'm just going to go ahead and choose the Extrude option. I'm going to choose to extrude all of those little arrowy details that I made, right? I only have my overmold details body turned on. All my other bodies are turned off. And I'm going to drag that arrow down. And now instead of cutting here, what I want to do is I want to choose the Intersect Operation. So in the Extrude Operation section, instead of cut, I'm going to choose Intersection. And now you can see only the places where my extrusion and that body are intersecting with each other am I getting my my detail shapes popping out there. And then I'm going to say OK here. And now I can turn back on my overmold, and you can see that those are indeed my little details popping up there. Now, the problem that we have here is they go down below where our overmold, where the plastic is. So this intersects with the plastic. And I guess really that doesn't make a difference as far as like the production of this goes. But we're going to go ahead and use that same tool that same trick we just learned. So if I turn on my thick plastic here, and we're going to use this thick plastic body to cut away from all these other bodies. In fact, before we do that, let's go ahead and combine them. So from the Modify menu, I'm going to go ahead and choose this Combine option. This time we are going to be joining. And I'm going to join my overmold body as the target body. And then the tool bodies are going to be each one of the shapes that this overmold detail made, because it made separate bodies for me. Depending on the drawing you make, it'll make separate bodies for you too. And we're going to combine those all into one body. And I don't want to keep my tools in this case, because I'm just going to combine that all into one. And I'm going to say OK. And now we can use that trick that we made here. So from the Modify menu, I'm going to come down to the Combine option again. This time we are indeed going to cut like we did the first time. And the target, the thing that we're cutting, is our overmold. And the tool that we're going to use to cut that overmold is our thick plastic. And we are going to keep that tool because we want to still have our thick plastic after we use it. And then I'm going to say OK. All right, cool. So now we've got kind of the beginnings of our overmold here. The next thing that we want to do here with our body is we've got an overlapping problem. Oh, did we fix that in the first round? We did not. So the other thing that this shell is overlapping with is our roller down here. So let's go ahead and cut away the part where the opening for our roller in the bottom here. So I'm gonna grab from my Create menu. I'm gonna grab that Create Sketch option, and I'm gonna choose to create a sketch right on the side of my roller. So either side will work. The right or the left side, it doesn't really matter a whole lot. In fact, if I spin around to the side of my roller that doesn't have as much geometry, it'll be easier for me to figure out, like this side there is kind of the widest area, so the widest diameter circle, let's say. So we just need to draw a circle that is going to be a little bit wider than our roller is. And a little bit, I would give a little bit of room here. So this is, my roller is like roughly 2.8. I'm going to make mine 3 inches. 3 inches gives a room for the roller to breathe because this thing is spinning around real fast inside of our money shooting tool here. So we want to have some room for breathing, some tolerance in there. So 3 inches was good for me. It might be a little bit different for you. And then I'm going to go ahead and say Finish Sketch. Now we've got a sketch that we can name over here. And this sketch, I'm just going to call my roller cutaway. Because this is the sketch that we're going to use to cut away the part of our overmold and plastic shell down here that we don't want to keep because it's in the way. So from my Create menu, I'm just going to choose this Extrude option. I'm going to choose the parts of this circle. For me, it's 2 bits. Actually, it's going to be 3 bits for some reason, but you'll have to choose all of the parts so it's a fully solid 3-inch circle. And now if I drag this inward, you could see this Objects to Cut dialog box that we kind of talked about, or this drop-down menu is going to be real important here. So I'm going to turn off all the bodies that I do not want to cut, because the only bodies that I want to cut are my thick plastic and my overmold. And I'm going to extrude this out in this direction a little bit past my roller. Again, because this thing is spinning around, so we want to have a little bit of room for breathing in there. And we created that sketch right on top of the roller on this side. Or on one of the sides, you created your sketch right on top of that roller. So instead of extruding a direction of one side here, I'm going to extrude a direction of 2 sides. So from this direction option in our extrude window, instead of one side, I'm selecting 2 sides. And then I can just take this other arrow and give it that little bit of breathing room on that side too. 0.1 inches is probably fine. You can go 1/8 of an inch if you wanted to. In fact, I'm going to go 1/8 of an inch just to be on the safe side there. And again, the parts that I almost missed one. I want to make sure in my Objects to Cut drop-down menu here underneath the operation in my extrude window that I'm only cutting away from the bodies that I want to cut away from. And that's our thick plastic and our overmold here. All right, and then I'm going to say OK. And now I think the last thing that we're going to do in this class is we need to mount our, so if I turn off my thick plastic and I turn off my overmold, oh gosh, my cache tray is mostly turned off as well, apparently. How come I can't see my cache tray? Oh, you know what? I've done something wrong. So this is good news. All right, so I just went to go find my cache tray. So here's my cache tray. This is what's left of my cache tray. And I can tell by looking at this exactly what I did here. Can anybody else see what I did wrong? You can pipe up if you want to. Any ideas? So what I did here, what happened was when I extruded my overmold details, so let's go ahead and turn that overmold on. It's probably this extrusion right here. When I extruded this overmold details here, I had on, oh, that's not it. Is it this guy? This is it. So when I extruded this overmold details, there is an Objects to Cut in the Intersect operation. And because I didn't spin down this Objects to Cut thing in my Intersect operation, because I don't really think about it like that, I was accidentally intersecting with my tray walls, my cache walls of my of my cache tray. So because I was intersecting with them, it was cutting it away and getting rid of them. So this objects to cut thing becomes important sometimes, for sure. So, you know, kind of check that out. That objects to cut spin down is a good one to take a look at. I'm glad that happened here, because now the last thing we want to do in the last 5 minutes here is to create the way to mount our cache tray. We've already got mounting holes, but we need to create a way for this cache tray to mount to our thick plastic layer, right? And this is going to actually be a pretty simple operation. So if I spin around, so I'm looking at the bottom of my plastic tray here, and I create a sketch on the surface that is the bottom of my plastic tray. So that is the surface I'm going to create my sketch on. So you guys can see what that looks like before I create my sketch on it. So I'm going to go ahead and say create, and then create sketch, and then I'm going to try to very carefully choose. I'm going to have to zoom in real close so I make sure that I pick the right surface to draw on here, because when the things are ghosted out, it's difficult to make sure you're picking on the right surface. All right, so I've got some geometry that it's already created here for me, because I've created a sketch on a three-dimensional surface here. So all I have to do to finish this sketch is to draw a line. I kind of want to draw a line that connects this side all the way over to this side here. And what that does is it creates a division from that is like represents this back area from the front area, right? So this back area includes my mounting holes, and this is what I want to be able to have on my thin, thick plastic shell that I made there. So once we've got that line drawn, and you can see that there is a division here, I'm going to go ahead and say finish sketch. I'm going to name that sketch, and that sketch is going to be the cache tray mount, because it's the mount for our cache tray to our thick plastic. And now in order to create the actual geometry of that mount, I'm going to grab this extrude tool. I'm going to click on that area that I segmented out with that line. And now if I spin around, so I'm looking down, and again, my active body is still my body component, so it's the shell, all those shells that I was making. I'm going to turn on, gosh, is it going to let me see it? I'm going to turn on my thin plastic. But I can't see what I need to click on. So what we need to do here is we need to see through our plastic. And in order to do that, we're going to use a tool from the Inspect menu. So if we come up to this Inspect menu and choose this section analysis tool here. And actually that's not the section or the face that I want to offset. I want to do a section analysis like this, that's going to look straight down, right? I'm going to turn on my thick plastic again. So now we can see we're kind of cutting it in half. We're bisecting it. in this direction, kind of like front to back horizontally. And then I'm going to say OK. Oh, and I've got my analysis turned off. That's why it disappeared. So now let's try that one more time. I'm going to spin around so I'm looking at the bottom. I'm going to turn off my thick plastic so I can see through to the sketch that I want to extrude. So I'm going to grab my extrude tool. I'm going to highlight that part of that cache tray mount sketch that we segmented there. And now if I look down, if I spin my drawing view so I'm looking down, and I turn my thick plastic on, and I'm going to turn off the visibility on my cache tray component in my browser. So now that cache tray is not there anymore. And now if I change the extent type in my extrude from distance to to object, and I pick this surface down here, is it going to make it for me? Sure is. I had to change my extend type, so it would not make it the extend type, what is that called? To selected face. I had to change my extend type to two adjacent faces. And then it goes ahead and extrudes it down to that body there. Now, there could be geometries that it's really just not going to do this for you. So if it is not going to do this kind of extrude where it extrudes it to the body, like mine is working out just fine and it's saying join. But I've had occasions where this extrude to a surface doesn't really work out. And in those occasions, what I chose to do is instead of saying, all right, to object, all right, instead of that, I'm going to go a distance. I'm going to extend it down there and choose to make it a new body. And then I use the combine tool to cut away. So I'll grab my combine tool here, and the object, just like we had been doing before, we use combine to cut. So the object that I want to cut is that weird shape that I just made. And then the tool body is like whatever the surface is you were trying to get to there, right? And now I have that body is cut in two. And I can just turn off the one body over here in my browser, and now I have the same kind of operation. So if anybody had an issue with their geometry not working out well when they were doing that extend to option, that's an option for you. But it was working out for me, so I'm going to undo a couple of times, and I'm going to do that one more time. So extrude. The shape that I'm going to extrude is my mount. Turn off my cache tray. Turn on my thick plastic. Change my extent type to to object. Select the object. And then it can't complete like this, but if I change it to two adjacent faces, then we're good to go. And join is exactly what I want to do there. And now we're good. So that's it. That's as far as we're going to get in this class here. It's 8 o'clock here. Tell you what, let me put it up to a vote. You can obviously draw an overmold, or maybe it would be good practice to like try this technique on your own, right? And a good opportunity to try this technique on your own would be drawing some detail in the side of this body, or in the bottom of it, or in the back. So I would encourage you to do that if you want to try testing this technique a little bit more and See if you know, learned some knowledge here. See if you can make like a cutaway in the side of your tool or a cutaway in the back or the bottom. Next week, do you guys want to keep going with this? So obviously we need to do a handle. The handle is going to be made the same way. So we're going to make a surface body, and we're going to use the same techniques here to make our handle for this tool. Are you guys interested in doing this one more time and making the handle?
Honestly, that's up to you. If it's the same techniques, I don't know if it matters to me. So I guess unless Mike really wants to go through that process.
Mike, are you into it?
This whole thing is a little bit over my head. I feel like a kid who wandered into the wrong class.
Oh no.
But I'm just smiling, nodding my head, trying not to look too dumb.
What?
Every now and then I'll pick up. Well, just too much, too quick, Carl.
Okay.
I'm several orders of magnitude down below you.
Well, let's do the handle next week then. So we'll do some more. It'll give us some more practice. We'll do a handle next week, and that'll let us walk through what we did to make the actual surface body. We'll make a new kind of surface body. We might make new tools or use a different tool to make it. Maybe instead of loft, we'll do something else. But yeah, let's draw a handle next week. And until next week, if you guys want to, you can, like I said, experiment with making the overmold detail on the side of your tool here. I will say, from my experience, and eventually, the last class, we're going to actually make the molds for this overmold, right? And if we're going to make this mold for this overmold, anywhere where there's an opening, you can't have overmold. So just as like a rule of thumb, so down below here, and in the face of the opening for the cache to come out, you gotta have plastic as the layer up above it. Otherwise, when you're like filling your mold, you end up just filling the inside of your tool with rubber because of the way this works. So anywhere where there's an opening in your tool, this has got to be like bare plastic around it. So we'd have to draw a cutout like we did up here. We'd have to have that same kind of cutout in the front of our tool here where this opening is, and then a cutout in our overmold down below here where this opening is. Just otherwise, when you're filling it with the liquid rubber just pours into the inside of your tool and fills up that whole cavity, and then you're not going to be having a good time. So that's the only caveat I have for you for making your overmold design, is anywhere where there's an opening, you can't have overmold go right up to the opening. Make sense? Cool. Otherwise, we'll see you guys next week. Thanks for joining us. We'll keep going and draw a handle.
Thank you much, Carl. See you next week.
Yeah, we'll see you next week.
Carl, I had a couple
Yeah.
questions, not related to the actual modeling,